First thing is, everyone hasn't met me before. The accent comes as a surprise, maybe, given the surname. The second thing is, I brought this bit of paper with me because we, as said, we do a lot of research, and we've just released another bit of research which I read on the plane coming over this morning. So I've written down some highlights, so forgive me if I refer to them because it is pretty hot off the press. I think what I want to talk about is understanding the anatomy of performance, and it's really going to the engage and thrive philosophy of the, if you like, the talent process. Because we as a company, we passionately believe in the use of science and data as, and I'm very careful with this word, as an augmentation to the business processes that we're all engaged with. And there are two things I'm really going to focus on. One is, fundamentally, we believe that it's critical that you understand the deep nature of sales behavior, and that you put in place an infrastructure then allows you to understand the levers that you can pull to change or manipulate that behavior with a view to doing two things: fundamentally actually improving performance, but improving the performance of the individual, not only for the sake of the company, but actually for the sake of the individual. And some of these stats are pretty telling. We just did we actually did a global piece of research. It was about 1,600 companies in the end, fairly significant companies, and we asked them a lot of stuff. But it was really cool. It's called the State of Sales, and I'll refer to it to you at the end. But one of the things that came out, and it was really, we were asking about what's happening in the world of sales. What's the sort of balance between traditional field or outside sales and inside sales, hybrid sales, digital sales, whatever term you use, and perm any one of those, and why a change is happening. Our premise was that there was a major shift going on from outside to inside. No. It's actually static, and it's been static now for about 3 years, which came as a surprise. And as we tend to do, we dig deeper. But we asked then, but for those organizations that are investing more in inside sales, digital sales, what were the motivations? Number one motivation, by far. Anyone want to guess? No. Good one. Okay, sort of cost. Actually, the way it was defined most frequently was increased productivity. So it's a function of new customers, i.e., if I put it in context of new revenue, at a lower cost. So it's the function of both those. 54% of respondents said we're doing it for increased productivity. So we went, interesting. So let's look at some other data points. Here's a couple of things. Now, I am not sure what the rationale, how to hypothesize this, so I'm going to leave it with you to think about, and if you want to talk to me later, we'd love to discuss it. This shift, we believed, was happening back towards a highly productive, lower cost-based, more run rate type of business from an inside or a digital sales. That change has slowed down. However, of all the company respondents said, when we asked them about what were the activities that their outside salespeople, these are the field salespeople, these are people that Ken us oldies, we refer to them as the big bag carriers, big quotas, go and see customers, have lunch, dinner, blah blah blah. You know the drill, right? We asked it, say, well, okay, for your outside sellers, help us understand what they do. How do they spend their time? There has been over a 50% increase in outside sellers spending their time selling remotely. Holy shit. So I'm not sure I understand that. There's something going on. Now, I will give you a couple of options to think about, and you maybe, as I say, please challenge me, maybe not now, but later on. Number one, either, and by the way, there was a marked difference between the US and Europe. A very marked difference, i.e., it was much higher in Europe. So that 50% increase is globally, but it was much higher in Europe. So either we, collectively, are not changing quick enough. All we've done, we've changed the way our outside sellers sell, and therefore are not really driving that productivity, even though we said that was number one priority. Or simply, we're recognizing the fact that people are buying differently. And a whole load of channels that become part of, I won't go omni-channel because Ken's like spitting on that word, whatever word he used, many of those channels, and we were just manipulating all of them. Don't know. But it's an interesting part of trying to understand the anatomy of a sales process and understand the anatomy of performance. So we think about it like this. For sales talent to really thrive, we've got to incorporate data and science into the way they work. Not impose it, but incorporate it. Embed it deeply in their workflow so it becomes indicative as part of their work. And if we can predict the right behavior at the right time, we can enable world-class performance. And we think about it in three ways, these three challenges. I'm not an expert in any way, shape, or form about hiring the right people. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the problems, and I've been guilty of every single one of them. So I'm not going to put my hand up as a good example. But what I, and I'm sure we all are, continually challenged with as managers is, why is my sales team not performing consistently? Why is that happening? You know, we all know, right? We have great quarters, bad quarters, good months, bad months. We have this sort of often an infrequent profiling of how we do our business. But I need to retain the greater talent, the greater performance across my business, and how do I do that? So that's the sort of things I'm going to talk about. Sorry, I just jumped over this. This is some data point. This is what it costs, attrition costs you if you've got a sales team of 100 people. That's per year. So, almost, 750,000 euros a year. That's the average salary of 84,000 came directly from our survey. That's the European. We are slightly higher on average on base than the US, lower on OTE, so lower on variables. This rate of 17.7% is an average rate. I will tell you, that's an average global rate that we found from the survey. I will tell you that the average rate of attrition in Europe is now just topped over 20%. So we're going up. And if I isolate further and put it in the context of Ireland, in fact, isolate further and put it in context in Dublin, add another maybe 7 to 8 points. Average sales attrition in Dublin is close to mid-20s to just above. Some of you feel this, I know that. Some organizations have a real problem. Now, there are specific environmental issues with Dublin. It's a small community. There are lots of sales organizations here. You're all vying for the same talent. And if you think about it, that's one of your choices, right? One of your choices to deal with sales performance and retaining people is just go out and nick all the good people. But that cost probably, you have a 3x factor on top of that cost if you do that. So maybe the alternative is actually trying to get the people you've got to perform better, but understanding the anatomy of what they're supposed to do or what you want them to do and dealing with that way. So, let me find another stat for you. We have got to manage an increasing problem, and the survey told us that this attrition rate is just going north continually. It's clicking up fairly consistently. Now, we know also because one of the things, if you think about it, there are something like, on census data, there's something like 8.5 to 9 million salespeople in the world today. That will reduce by about 40% in the next 5 years. Technology will drive that, for sure. So we've got to think about two things. How we deal with that and how we actually think about talent. Here's an interesting, this is Gallup data, and here's the story here. And it goes back, sort of overlaps with Ken a little bit. Any of us who are sort of a little bit older, this chart looks like Turkey's voting for Christmas. Because what this is telling us, what Gallup is telling us, is that in the long run, and it isn't that long, it's 18 months, talent outperforms experience. Talent outperforms experience. And maybe that's a good news story, insofar as if Ken's true, right, then we just hire young, vibrant talent and mold them and help them develop themselves. But we also think about it and now this is shifting really to give you a sense of, at Inside Sales, this is how we think about our hiring process. We look at 4 quadrants. We look at the obvious things like ambition, but not just ambition about I want to be the number 1 salesperson. It's more about a life ambition, that the person wants to succeed in what they do. And there are clear characteristics. Often, it's something associated with sport. There's a very, very high correlation between somebody who's successful in their sphere, at whatever they do in the sporting world, and sales performance. We look at empathy and the idea that the person can align them to the emotional and psychological behavior of a buyer, and they can empathize with that is very strong. Again, an indicator of that is often the level to which an individual engages in outside activities like things like charities or giving type of environments. We look at resilience. Clearly, that resilience is all based around the ability of a person to deal with adversity. And not how they deal with it, how they come out the other side of it. So we look for a trait where someone sees a loss as a challenge. So they lose something, and then next time they have to do it, they challenge themselves for that not to happen again. But have the resilience to build and think about how they do that. And then finally, just this idea of openness, the idea of be open to ideas, but be open to sharing and sharing knowledge. And it's interesting, that sort of fits with what Ken was saying about collaboration. So, we try to hire the right people. Okay, so what do? Maybe if we do it internally for a big enough company, we have our own process. We look for CVs. We do hiring. We do hiring panels. We maybe do personality. The fact is, we still do the same things we were doing 10 years ago, mostly, and mostly they are flawed. So here's the interesting thing, and this is not for companies with internal HR and talent acquisition. For those companies who go out to third parties, and if there are any recruiters here, I sincerely apologise. But this is data, it's not me. Deeming said, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. But this is data-based. Literally, if you go to a recruiting firm, headhunting firm, they're going to be right about 50% of the time. They'll hire the right talent for the right job about 50% of the time. Okay, how would you react if I said, actually, here's a coin, flip it? It's about the same odds, right? Gallup believe that organizations globally get it wrong 80% of the time. We mismatch talent to the role we're looking to fulfill. And so, not surprisingly, we get, and the 30% attrition rate here is all roles, all jobs globally, right? Not surprising, we crazily miss on people actually attaining and performing. Our data shows on the survey of 57% quota attainment. And by the way, that's down something like 8 points since we last did it 2 years ago. So that's going like south. So it's really incumbent on us, we believe, is actually truly to try and understand the anatomy of performance. So sorry about the slide, but it's about making a change. So when we think about it, we think about 3 dimensions. So if I'm looking at performance, I'm going to talk to this is all in the context of sales, by the way. I'm talking to the sales manager. If I'm looking at performance, I'm talking to the rep. If I'm looking at performance, I'm talking to my data. So these are just some of, and you'll all recognize these indicators, some of the indicators we use, but here's the difference. Too many of us are caught in the spiral of just looking at lagging indicators. You know what? You didn't have a great quarter, you missed your number. Your quota was X, you got to Y. And we're fixated, and maybe to a degree we have to have a certain degree of fixation with those lagging indicators, but we miss all of the leading indicators. We miss all of the things that help us or should help us improve an individual's performance by understanding them and understanding the anatomy of the sales process and be able to intervene through those leading indicators to change the nature of performance. So we started building this idea of an effectiveness quadrant. And really, you can see there's 2 dimensions: broadly quota attainment and pipeline development. And within those, there are a multitude of data points that we use. How can we do this? Well, it's sort of what my company does. We're an artificial intelligence company. We have billions and billions of data points. We look at those and we draw inference, insight, predictions from that data, and we use that data in a feedback loop to our salespeople to enable them to manage their performance. But broadly, what we found when we've done this, and we've done this for ourselves, and we do it for our customers, we broadly found there are these 4 boxes. Obviously, it's a bottom left to top right proposition. So if you're in the challenged, you're buggered on your pipeline, you're buggered on your quota, you're like figuring out. Now, why is that important to retention? These people here's the thing. These people, at best, are actively disengaged. Would it surprise you that the data that we found is across globally of sales organizations, we look at 3 dimensions: actively disengaged, and actively engaged. In the actively engaged category, it rated to only 17% of the sales force. Okay, that means 83% of your sales organization are okay, or I'm out, and I'm just looking for the right time to go. Not surprisingly, most of them are down here. Not surprisingly, most often cited issue for a salesperson is, I am not getting the help I need. I am not given enough pipeline. People nodding, so you've heard this, right? My quota is too high. All lagging indicators. We've got to work on understanding the leading indicators. So we've got to think about how do we build, and you've all seen these people in your organization, right? So you know who the pipeline pioneers are. They're guys and girls that are great at getting on and building opportunity. They will, irrespective of what marketing does for them, what demand generation does for them, what channels or whatever does for them, they'll go out and they'll find their own business in their territory. However, they also they like doing this. And maybe not so great or don't like so much trying to close business. So they build great pipelines but then have trouble closing it. Or you've got these people up this end, quota focused, who don't give a toss about anything else unless it goes into their quota and counts to get their quota, and they get quota recognition against it. And that's the only thing that motivates them. They will shout at everyone. They'll find the marketing person and pin them up to the wall and say, where's my pipeline? And I want it now, and it better be out of closing this quarter. And what we found is this has a profound effect when you think about these segments and how you do business. These numbers, don't fixate, I'm going to come back to these numbers in a minute. This is actually a real case study. So processed, not surprisingly, bottom left, top right. How do we get our people there? Well, what we did is actually identify that understanding anatomy is really associated with what are the activities that drive success. Now, I've just given some examples of things like deals open and close the same quarter, pipeline maturation, replenishment, what's the real forecast accuracy, and how do you disaggregate that forecast accuracy. These will change with your organizations depending on the cadence of your business. But these are what we're managing at the rep level. Most organizations we talk to may do this at the sales organization level. And most definitely do this, but in a lagging constitution. So they look at it, come the end of the quarter, sales managers go off, find the sales ops, sit down with sales ops, right, tell me what happened. And they get more data than you can throw a stick at, and then they're trying to work out what all that data means. And in the meantime, the rep gets their commission plan, And that tells them exactly what happened in their world, in their context. But it doesn't help them in terms of what changes they've got to make. You keep me good on time?
You're all right.
Okay. But in this example, we took this organization and we ran them through these 4 quadrants. And, roughly they had a demographic. And what we found is by putting in that structure of management, of understanding the anatomy of how they sold, with the KPIs and the appropriate weighting, what it delivered was actually a shift that moved up the various segmentation, and the difference for them was a 16 million uplift in revenue. That related to about, to give you context, that was about a 1.6, 1.7 lift in revenue, so not insignificant. Now, the challenge for most organizations is one of 2 things. They either don't have this data, and to me, often this is where CRM has blatantly failed because it's not capturing this, or there isn't the infrastructure to enable you to actually take that, if you do have that data, take all of that data and make sense of it, right? And this is where, and going back to what Ken says, in our view, this is where machines take over. This is where you get the machine to do all this for you. Now, it still needs the manager to have the right attributes. So if I'm looking across those KPIs with one of my sales people, I still need to have the right skills and understanding and ability to coach to make a difference, to help that salesperson understand how those KPIs and movement of those KPIs will change the nature of their performance and their success. Why is it important? Again, I'll give you another stat. We looked at what does great higher performance mean? And some of this is going to be, there's a saying that hindsight is the best form of prediction. So some of this you can say, yeah, well, sort of obvious. Well, the data is the proving of the obvious. So high performers generally achieve about 30% higher quota attainment. So moving someone from these 2 to there is about a 30% uplift in quota attainment. Equally, interesting enough, about a 34% increase in deal win rate. So there's some correlation between helping them understand the anatomy of performance and at the very least, confidence that a salesperson has. And think about what I said, this is a talent issue. This is about releasing inherent talent by giving salespeople a path that they can understand and making it really clear to them. And if you put it in the context of Ken, the immediacy of data and metrics is super helpful for an individual to understand, right? Most of us have a strong visual learning sort of bent, right? So seeing this is actually very impactful. But we're talking about retaining talent. We found that the modeling of this actually improved tenure by between 16 and 20 months, right? And this is at a time when our data showed us that average tenure is dropping quite significantly. So 2 years ago, the average tenure for a salesperson in the US, 3 years, 4 months. It's now hovering down just below 3 years. Average tenure for a sales rep in Europe is now, for the first time in all the data we've ever collected, lower than it was in the US. Now, I don't know about you lot, but my instinctively, I always think, well, US is a bit more aggressive, people move around more. Well, the world's changed. We do more moving around than our US counterparts for the first time, certainly in the realms of data we collect. So, I want to talk a little bit about AI, simply because this is the driver underneath. This is sort of the engine that's driving that. Let the machine do the work. And here's the challenge we have, and it sort of dovetails quite nicely what Ken was saying. We looked at the world of AI. We did another piece of research that asked, what is this fourth industrial revolution? What does it really mean? 55% of people we spoke to said they used AI outside the office. Either a deliberate engagement or impact engagement. And what I mean by that is most people engage with AI if they've got some form of smarty phone, an iPhone or and there are other good products on the market. They always say that, don't they? Oh, they're iPhone. Oh, yes, but there are other good products on the market. I can't think. Anyway, when we asked the same question of people in what they did in work, it dropped to less than 20% people said they felt there was any engagement with artificial intelligence in the workplace. The really weird one, and this really got me thinking, we asked sort of an open-ended question. What else do you think? What else do you think about AI? There was a 3% response of people who said they believed within the next 5 years they would be managed by a robot. I don't know, maybe. Sort of interesting. But 75% of executives said their business was going to be impacted. The real starting thing is this sort of 1.2 trillion replacement cost. Okay, bigger than the GDP. I think that's bigger than the GDP of Russia, just. 1.2 trillion displacement cost, which means that those using AI will still be the business from those not. And that's a sort of eye-opener. But in the context of what we're talking about, really we're thinking about how do you map the use of artificial intelligence to help you drive this performance, which we believe has an inherent link with how you engage with employees and how they thrive, and in the sales world. We all, again, people of my age always think back and say, well, look, if they're really a good salesperson, they really are driven by their compensation plan, right? The old story was the greatest salespeople were the ones that knew how to really manipulate the comp plan. So they figured out every hole there possibly was, or every loophole in the comp plan, and drove like a coach and horses through it so they could earn as much money. But really we're talking about this idea of two questions: building better pipeline, converting more pipeline, and how do you do it? And I wanted to share you this example. And there are two messages. The one message is the uplift. So, this company adopted AI. They had a 1.8x uplift in connect rate with customers that resulted in a 2.5x rate. Because 2.5x is 250%, right? Increase in pipeline, 2.8 increase in close rates, 85% larger deals. But here's the interesting thing. Always the interesting thing for me is these are all great numbers, but it was the 73% adoption. So I started thinking about this, and we dug into this. It was like, we're outraged. How could it be only be 73? Surely it's 100% adoption. Surely the machine's taking over, everyone's doing as they're told. Well, no. We found that human behavior still exists, and this is why ultimately the 3% that think they're going to be managed by a robot, probably not in the next 10 years, unless they're in any specific industries. And it's because as salespeople particularly, sometimes we still believe we're right, even though the data is telling us something different, right? This deal, how many times have you heard it, right? Everything about an opportunity, it's pushed 10 times. There is no executive sponsor. They actually don't have any compelling event. But the sales guy says, or sales girl says, it's definitely going to close this quarter. I just know. Had coffee with this guy yesterday. He's like, he knows someone who knows someone. He reckons it's going to close. I'm so confident this is going to close. I'm going to commit this. This is closing. And every single part of the data is saying, no, it's not, surely. So, conclusions. There is absolutely a relationship between thinking about how we retain our best and just retaining our sales talent and understanding the anatomy of performance. But it's two things that are really important. One is understanding sales behavior. And what we talk about signals and having passively observing those signals. So as your salespeople are performing day to day, you passively, through the data, observe what they do. And what I mean by that is, go back to some very simple things. I just mentioned some. How often does the salesperson change the close date? How many periods does it shift through? How much does the product portfolio of that particular deal change? How many new contacts are added to the opportunity? You know all these, because we're all salespeople. You know all of those things. But it's putting them all together to understand that data to predict what's likely to happen in the future. And enabling, the second part of this is enabling your salespeople to have access to that so they can proactively change the way they perform. Why should we do it? 30% higher quota attainment, 34% increase in deal rate, 16 to 20 months increase in tenure, and maybe avoiding some of that, if you've got a 100 people sales team, avoiding some of that €750,000 cost burden that you're going to have through, replacing people for opportunity lost cost and all of those things that we know come along with it. So I said I would point you in the direction of a couple of things. You can find all of these on our webpage. It's very simple, www.insidesales.com. If you go to, I think it's called research, we have a research lab and all our materials produced, and it's freely available to anyone who wants to go on there. You don't have to sign up for anything, just help yourself. There's a couple of things that are interesting. There was one where you could actually benchmark your pipeline. So we have over 120 billion sales pipeline transactions that we've measured. And we've used that to build through 13 years, build best practice. And we allow you then to yourself to benchmark. It's a return just for you to use. Secondly, leverage best practice. I've referred to state of sales research quite a bit. It's a free piece of research. It's a lot of data. And we've tried to condense it down. I will guarantee you look at some of it and say that's complete horseshit, because it just doesn't relate to your experience. Or maybe more importantly, you look at it and say, this is worth debating. And I'll go back to the one that I'm really not struggling with, but it's quizzing me, is this remote selling thing. I just have this inherent belief that if, as our data shows, outside salespeople on average earn about 40 to 42% more than an inside sales rep, why are we paying that 42% more for them to do something that an inside sales organization could do probably more effectively? What the hell is going on? Are we just missing something? And so any ideas you have will be warmly welcome. We use the response as part of our sort of cyclical research process. So please help yourself to that. And then what I was talking about, how that quadrant, that's a process we can run for you called an SEQ. It's not a charge thing. What we're trying to do is just share best practice. So with that, thank you very much.
We're going to take some questions.
Sure.
Okay. We'll take a couple of questions. I have a question, first of all. It relates to the time-based closing research you did. What are the differences in terms of the top performers? How do they differ in terms of when they close their opportunities throughout the quarter versus your normal performers?
There were some really obvious ones. Not surprising, as you go into I think it's probably the last 7 working days of a quarter, 2 things happen. We know what they are, right? Mm-hmm. Discounts go up. And generally, deal structure becomes what I would call unstable. And what I mean by that is you give great discounts, you shorter down the years, you do whatever it takes to get the deal. Oh, and by the way, it was interesting when Connor asked you to put your hands up, not many people did. The data we did said that this happens in about 85% of sales organizations. So about 60% of you are fibbing. There was also a lot of parallel in terms of day of week. Fairly obvious things that Fridays are not good, Mondays are not good.
For closing?
Yeah.
Now, is this for average performance? What about for top performers?
For top performers, basically, if you think of a quarterly profile, so let's say it's an organization that's measured on a quarter, and that's usually the fundamental driver, right? A top performer will generally, so on average, and I'll give you so you can think about top, on average, salespeople are 20% accurate at the start of a quarter in terms of their forecast. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean they don't hit their quota, but it means what happens is what they said they were going to do and the deals they said they were going to close, 80% of them don't happen and they fail. Top performers, they're close to about 40 to 45%.
Okay.
And the characteristics, some of the characteristics that they demonstrate are some very basic things. It is very noticeable, people we talk to, that those successful salespeople engage their customer in what they called either a mutual success plan, but which really was internally referred to as a close plan. Mm-hmm. So they worked with their customer and said, okay, I'll do this by then, you'll do this by then. And typically, guess where it was around? What parts of the sales process? Any guesses? Absolutely. 2, procurement, legal. Because what we found in the lowest performers was they failed to recognize that legal and procurement is not homogeneous. And you can go to some organization and the legal input is someone saying, yeah, where do I sign? And you go to some organizations when there's a whole battery, an army of legal people that will go through everything. And again, we all know where the pain points are, right? Warranty and limitation of liability, things like that. So higher performers mapped their way into a close. Always, almost always, in every case, they never, when they were in their CRM, never put the close date as the last day of the month or quarter. Never.
Wow.
They worked a buffer of about 12 days, working days usually. So they would report upwards, never with a date that was the end of the month.
Okay, another question. I have a couple of questions I'm going to ask the audience with questions. Number of stakeholders is different between top performers versus other performers?
I think the difference is not in the number of stakeholders, it's in the recognition of the number of stakeholders. Top performers tend to make sure that they tend to produce 2 maps. First is the organizational chart, and the second is an influence chart. So, it's understanding, and we've all seen it, right? We've all looked at an org chart and said, right, there's the CEO, there's the CIO, there's the head of legal, there's the head of procurement. Those are my quadrant. Those are the people I want to ring fence. Only to find that there's someone else, maybe a founder or someone else who's hugely influential, but's not seen on any org chart. And so top performers tend to look at that. They tend to look at the org chart, and then they tend to build an influence map. Okay. And it goes back to that idea we look for, that idea of empathy.
Okay. One more question, then I'll go, Howard. In terms of, you mentioned there was no difference in pipeline coverage really between top performers and other performers. Can you explore that item with us just for a moment, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think we generally found that the metrics for pipeline coverage were pretty similar. So, most organizations, if you ask them, what's your pipeline coverage you need? Most people's gut reaction is 3x, exactly. Doesn't matter. The types of business, it's 3x. Okay, so we started looking at that. So when we started looking at it, and the first question we asked, we said, yes, we deliver 3x. And we dug into the data, we then found wild variation. Actually, for some businesses, it wasn't nowhere near 3x, it was like 5, 7, 8x. And so the difference was top performers, low performers. Again, it's largely about that intellectual recognition. Top performers understand the anatomy and what they do. They understand what constitutes their pipeline. So, a good performer will look at what we call the 4 horsemen. It's not 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, that's wrong, but it's the 4 horsemen. And they will look at, what do I get out of straightforward demand generation? Generally, the things that marketing do. What do I get out of my BD organization? What do I have to do myself, self-sourced? And then the 4th is often, depending on your business, what do I get from my channel? And a good salesperson will understand that anatomy and then understand the relationship between those 4 and how he or she has to manage against those 4.
Okay. All right, do we have any questions, please, from the audience? Connor is here with the roving mic, or the roving questions box. I like it. A question over here, please.
A questions box.
Can you just let us know who you are and who you're with, and then tell us the question, please.
Okay. That's you. Hi, my name is Elisabetta Gerardi. I'm Inside Sales Manager with Palace Foods. My background is years in Symantec, which was obviously where my career went. So then I moved to Palace Foods, and in the food industry, a lot of what you're talking about was really resonating about my previous job, right? But in the food industry, I think we're probably the first inside sales team to, so I was challenged to create it from scratch in a very different environment, the food industry, very backwards, very old type of school of salesperson. There is no quarterly cycle, there's a daily, hourly cycle. Anyway, my question was, is there any research specifically in the food industry or in the initial stages of inside sales setup?
Yeah.
Because I'm up against an awful lot of challenges that in Symantec wouldn't even exist.
I guess in all honesty, I'm dragging. I don't think we've got anything that's very specific to the food industry. What I will say, if you go to our labs site, there's a lot of basic, construct. So things like how you should think about immediacy, and immediacy is, the time you should take, how quickly you should engage with a prospect or a customer. There's a lot of information around cadence. Okay, how should I engage with a customer, and how you fit those together, frequency and cadence, to build a model that enables give your salespeople a framework. So I would suggest maybe having a look at that.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Okay, Martin, let's thank Martin in a normal way. Thank you so much. Well done, Martin.